You've been through an emotional storm, one where someone pulled away just when you were giving your heart, and maybe for a long time you questioned yourself. You wondered what you did wrong, why it wasn't enough, why they couldn't stay, show up, or choose you the way you deserved. But listen closely, because something powerful is happening beneath the surface. There comes a moment in every human life, no matter how avoidant, no matter how guarded, when the soul cannot outrun truth anymore, when the armor begins to crack, when silence starts echoing louder than connection once did. And that moment is when they begin to regret the way they treated you. And here's the truth most people never understand. Regret isn't weakness. Regret is awareness finally waking up. It's the heart catching up to reality. It's the realization that the person they kept at arm's length is the one person who saw them, supported them, believed in them, and they pushed it away. See, avoidants don't run from you. They run from themselves, from emotions they don't know how to navigate, from intimacy that feels too raw, too real, too risky. But life has a beautiful way of circling back. Life exposes what we ignored, magnifies what we dismissed, and amplifies what we didn't appreciate. When an avoidant begins to regret how they treated you, it means something inside them has awakened. It means your absence spoke a language their fear never allowed them to hear. It means their soul finally felt the cost of losing someone who brought light into their life. But here's the part most people forget. Their regret is not your responsibility. Their growth is not your mission. Their healing is not your job. Your power comes from recognizing your worth was never diminished by their fear. You were not lacking. They were limiting themselves. You were offering connection. They were offering distance. You were showing up. They were shutting down. So take this moment not as validation of your pain, but as confirmation of your value. The regret they feel is proof of what you brought to the table. Proof that your presence had weight, proof that your love had impact, proof that your energy was a gift not everyone can hold. Use this chapter as fuel. Rise with greater clarity. Build boundaries powered by self-respect. Expand into the highest version of yourself, because the universe always honors a heart that refuses to shrink. If they come back, let them come back humbled, evolved, and aligned with the version of you that now stands stronger, wiser, and grounded in truth. And if they don't, then let this serve as a reminder that you were never meant to chase someone who couldn't meet you. The real victory is not their regret. It's your rebirth, your awakening, your power reclaimed, your spirit restored. This is your moment to step forward, to rise beyond the past, to embody the love, the strength, and the purpose that were always inside you. Because the person who once ran from your light is finally realizing what they lost. But you are realizing what you've gained. There comes a moment when even the most avoidant of hearts can no longer ignore the ripple effect of their actions. For years, they may have skirted emotional intimacy, retreated from vulnerability, or erected walls designed to protect themselves from discomfort. But those walls cannot withstand the force of reflection forever. Slowly, subtly, their mind begins to turn inward. They start replaying moments, small and large, moments they once dismissed, brushed aside, or rationalized away. The reality of how their behavior impacted you starts to surface, often in ways that surprise them, because avoidance is usually accompanied by an unconscious shielding from responsibility. It begins with a quiet awareness, almost imperceptible at first. They catch themselves thinking of a word they said that cut too deep, a silence that spoke too loudly, a promise they neglected to keep. In these reflections, a pattern emerges. They see the repeated choices they made that pushed you away, the emotional unavailability they cloaked as independence or self-preservation. And as they witness this pattern, a gnawing recognition begins to form that in their attempts to protect themselves from feeling, they inadvertently caused harm to someone who gave them nothing but sincerity, care, and devotion. This recognition is not just intellectual, it is visceral. They begin to feel the echoes of the moments they once ignored. The subtle pain in your eyes, the disappointment that lingered behind your smiles, the emptiness that grew when they withdrew. They may not yet know how to express it, and their instinct might still lean toward retreat, but beneath the surface, their emotional intelligence is awakening. They begin to understand that avoidance is not a shield. It is a barrier, and it has consequences. Each action, each absence, each unspoken word carries weight, and the weight is settling on their conscience. In this space of reflection, they start to grasp what was lost, not as a fleeting thought, but as a deep, unsettling realization. They notice the contrast between their own defensive behaviors and your unwavering presence. They see the moments where you were patient, present and willing to meet them even in their distance, and they confront the truth that their fear of vulnerability robbed both of you of connection. The realization is transformative because it is painful and illuminating. At the same time, they were given the gift of someone who valued them fully, and they responded with avoidance instead of engagement. They also begin to notice the subtle ways you enriched their life, ways that were invisible to them in the moment but impossible to ignore in hindsight. Your encouragement, your listening ear, your unwavering trust, these were not just acts of kindness. They were lifelines, opportunities for growth, and glimpses of emotional courage that they did not reciprocate. The avoidance that once felt protective now feels like a missed opportunity, and with that feeling comes the first stirrings of genuine remorse. But this is not just about guilt, it is about understanding. They begin to connect the dots between their past choices and your responses. They begin to see how their avoidance not only affected you, but also shaped their own inner world, leaving them with emptiness they cannot soothe alone. This reflective process, while uncomfortable, is a necessary step toward emotional maturity. They are learning, albeit belatedly, that running from connection does not eliminate consequence, it merely delays awareness. And in this reflective awareness, a shift begins to occur. What was once unconscious behavior now carries intention and thought. They begin to consider their role in the pain experienced, not as a fleeting acknowledgement, but as a persistent, gnawing awareness that your treatment was undeserved. They feel the imbalance of love given and love withheld, and they recognize that their avoidance created a loss that cannot easily be replaced. Every memory of neglect, every instance of emotional withdrawal becomes a teacher, instructing them in the value of presence, the cost of avoidance, and the profound impact of someone who truly cares. There is a moment when the armor that has kept them distant begins to show cracks. Avoidants often build walls so high and thick that it seems impossible for anyone to reach them. And even they themselves may forget that warmth, connection, and intimacy exist beyond those barriers. But life has a way of gently, insistently tugging at even the most fortified hearts. Slowly, subtly, the rigidity begins to soften, the cold distance, the automatic retreat, the habitual emotional unavailability. These things no longer serve them the way they once thought. And in the space created by this shift, vulnerability begins to surface. This change does not happen overnight. It may start as a fleeting awareness, a moment of pause, a quiet recognition of longing they cannot fully articulate. Perhaps they notice it in how your absence lingers, how memories of your presence return unbidden, or how the warmth you brought into their life now feels like something irreplaceable. They sense that their avoidance has left a vacuum, and in that vacuum something stirs, a yearning for connection, a curiosity about what was lost, a desire to experience closeness without fear. As the walls begin to soften, they start to allow themselves to feel emotions they previously avoided. This is not a sudden epiphany, but a gradual awakening. Anger gives way to remorse. Pride begins to dissolve into humility. The need to control, distance, or suppress the emotional truth fades, replaced by a willingness, hesitant at first, to confront what they once fled from. The moments where they previously would have turned away, dismissed, or disengaged now become opportunities for introspection. And in these moments, the first stirrings of true regret appear. Vulnerability is messy, unfamiliar territory for someone who has built their life around avoidance. Yet it is in this vulnerability that growth begins. They may show it in small ways. A message that seems tentative, a check-in that carries more emotion than they are accustomed to expressing, a tone of curiosity rather than detachment. These glimpses, though subtle, indicate a softening of defenses. They are testing the waters, feeling out what it means to allow their heart to engage without the crutch of avoidance. Every gesture, no matter how small, is a signal that they are beginning to reconcile their fear with the desire for connection. The emergence of vulnerability also reflects a deeper understanding of your value. They begin to recognize that the person they once pushed away was not just a companion, but a source of stability, care, and authenticity that they themselves could not replicate. The emotional walls that once felt protective now feel like limitations, barriers to something they now realize they desperately need and deeply regret losing. They may wrestle with frustration, guilt, and fear, but beneath all of that is a recognition their distance cost them what they once had, and they are beginning to understand the gravity of that loss. And in the space where avoidance softens, true reflection emerges. They start to see the relationship not as a series of inconveniences or emotional burdens, but as a series of moments they took for granted. They begin to replay conversations, small gestures, laughter, and shared experiences, not to relive them superficially, but to understand the depth of what they allowed to slip away. This reflection is transformative because it shifts the focus from their fear to your worth. It is the moment when they begin to comprehend that avoidance is not a neutral act. It has consequences that ripple through the lives of others. At this point, they may struggle to reconcile their fear with their longing. Vulnerability feels terrifying because it requires authenticity, humility, and courage, the very things they once avoided. But the emergence of vulnerability signals a turning point, a willingness to feel, a willingness to confront mistakes, a willingness to engage with the truth of the connection they once resisted. It is in this space between fear and recognition, between avoidance and longing, that they begin to truly regret how they treated you. The emotional walls soften not for the sake of guilt, but because the heart cannot hide from truth forever, and the soul eventually remembers what it once cherished. Once the walls have softened and vulnerability begins to emerge, an avoidant often starts to demonstrate a subtle yet profound shift. Their curiosity about your life awakens. For someone who has long been emotionally distant, curiosity is not superficial. It is a signal that they are beginning to reorient their attention from themselves to the other person. From fear to genuine interest. It may start quietly, almost imperceptibly. A casual question here, a lingering thought there, a subtle effort to check in. But these small acts are not trivial. They are the first visible manifestations of remorse, reflection, and growing awareness of your significance. This curiosity does not emerge because they feel obliged or because they want to control the narrative. It emerges from recognition. Recognition of what they missed. Recognition of your value, recognition of the fact that the life they've been living in isolation or avoidance is incomplete without the energy, connection, and presence you once offered freely. When an avoidant begins to care about the details of your day, your feelings, your achievements, or even your struggles, it signals a shift from self-preservation to relational consciousness, a powerful moment of awakening. They may start paying attention to things they would have previously ignored, the milestones you achieve, the challenges you face, the people who influence your life. Even if their communication is awkward or hesitant, it carries weight. Each attempt to engage, no matter how tentative, is a bridge spanning the gap between fear and the longing for reconnection. Their curiosity is the heart's way of saying, I see now what I failed to see before. It is the first acknowledgement that your presence mattered more than they allowed themselves to admit. But this awakening is rarely linear. They may oscillate between fear and desire, retreat and approach, hesitation and action. Avoidants are wired to protect themselves from vulnerability, yet curiosity begins to puncture that self-protective mechanism. When they find themselves thinking about your opinions, your experiences, or your life choices, it is evidence that the emotional impact of their absence has caught up with them. They start imagining scenarios where they could engage differently, where they could have shown up more fully, where they might be part of your world without retreating in fear. Curiosity also signals accountability, even if it is still emerging. To ask about your life is to recognize that they were once absent, and to acknowledge that absence requires humility. It is a way of emotionally recalibrating, to step into a mindset that considers the impact of one's past actions while simultaneously seeking to understand the present. This curiosity is not about control, it is about comprehension. It is their way of starting to map the emotional terrain they once ignored, to see your reality through the lens of care rather than avoidance. Importantly, this curiosity often reflects longing. It is not just intellectual, it is deeply emotional. They may want to know how you are, not only to feel connected, but also to sense the repercussions of their past behavior. They begin to understand that avoidance was a choice that created distance, and they recognize, sometimes painfully, that the void left by that distance is real and tangible. Each inquiry, each check-in, each subtle effort to observe or connect is a sign that their heart is no longer solely focused on self-preservation, but is now acknowledging the weight of your presence and the consequences of their absence. This awakening through curiosity can be transformative for them, but it also serves as a reflection for you. It demonstrates that their inner world has shifted. They are no longer blind to the depth of what they lost. Their interest in your life is not just curiosity for curiosity's sake. It is a bridge between regret and growth, a signal that the emotional door they once kept closed is beginning to open. And in that opening lies the possibility of reconnection, But more importantly, it validates the impact you had, the love you offered, and the patience you exhibited. Through this subtle awakening, they begin to learn a powerful truth: human connection cannot be avoided indefinitely. When curiosity emerges, it is the soul's way of reaching out, saying, consciously or unconsciously, that your presence mattered, your care was felt, and your absence leaves a void that cannot be ignored. It is the gentle yet undeniable proof that avoidance has limits, and that recognition, understanding, and care are forces even the most guarded hearts cannot escape. As the walls of avoidance continue to soften and curiosity begins to take root, the avoidant may reach a point where they attempt to reconnect. This reconnection is often awkward, tentative, and unfamiliar because they are stepping into a territory they have long feared: emotional exposure. For someone who has built patterns around distance, approaching the very person they once kept at arm's length is both terrifying and transformative. Every word they choose, every gesture they make, carries the weight of years spent defending themselves against vulnerability, and yet, in these attempts, there is a profound shift happening. Reconnection is rarely seamless. They may stumble over words, offer half-expressed apologies, or retreat suddenly if the emotional intensity feels too great. But even in these imperfect efforts, there is a signal. Their internal defenses are lowering. The avoidance that once dictated their behavior is being challenged by a deeper, undeniable recognition of your value. They are beginning to confront a truth they may have resisted for years, that pushing you away was a choice, one that carried consequences, and that the connection they avoided is precisely the one they now realize they need. This process is often accompanied by moments of hesitation. Avoidants are wired to protect themselves from rejection, disappointment, and intimacy, so reaching out can feel like stepping into a storm. Yet, their attempts, however small, demonstrate courage and growth. Even a brief message, a casual inquiry, or an unexpected gesture of care represents a monumental step forward. It is not just about reconnecting with you. It is about reconnecting with their own emotional capacity, acknowledging the impact of their past behaviors, and daring to allow themselves to be seen in ways they have long avoided. In these moments, their behavior begins to carry authenticity. They may not yet fully understand how to navigate emotional openness, but there is a sincerity in the effort. They are learning to bridge the gap between fear and longing, between past avoidance and present accountability. Each attempt to engage reflects an internal struggle, a desire to make amends, to be present, and to demonstrate that they are capable of more than the patterns that once defined them. The awkwardness of their approach is not a flaw. It is evidence of growth, a marker that they are stepping into unfamiliar, emotional territory with humility and intention. The attempts at reconnection are often subtle, almost imperceptible at first. They might show up in small ways, checking in on a milestone in your life, responding thoughtfully rather than dismissively, or showing interest in details they once ignored. Each of these actions is significant because it represents a departure from old habits. The avoidant is learning that avoidance is not a solution, that connection carries value, and that the person they once distanced themselves from holds a place in their emotional world that cannot be ignored. This stage is also a test of accountability. Reconnection is not simply about wanting what was lost, it is about recognizing responsibility for what went wrong. Avoidants who attempt to reconnect are beginning to understand that their actions or inactions left a gap, and that filling this gap requires more than words. It requires presence, consistency, and willingness to engage in ways that previously felt uncomfortable or risky. This is the point where their inner reflection starts manifesting outwardly, signaling that they are ready, in their own imperfect way, to meet you where you are. At its core, reconnection reflects a transformation in perspective. They are no longer entirely self-focused, no longer entirely consumed by fear. Instead, they are beginning to integrate their past avoidance with present awareness. They are learning that relationships cannot thrive in absence, that love cannot grow in silence, and that the cost of avoidance is the loss of meaningful connection. In each attempt, awkward, hesitant, yet deliberate, they demonstrate that regret has matured into action, that reflection has evolved into intention, and that the heart that once retreated is beginning, at last, to engage. Through these tentative steps, the avoidant is showing a remarkable truth, that even those who fear connection can be awakened to its value, that even those who run can, in time, return. and that the courage to reconnect is not about erasing the past, but about moving forward with awareness, humility, and the desire to honor what once mattered and perhaps what could matter again. When reflection deepens and attempts at reconnection begin, the avoidant often reaches a stage where genuine remorse starts to emerge. This remorse is not performative or superficial. It is a deep internal recognition that their actions or inactions have caused pain to someone who deserved their presence, their care, and their honesty. For someone who has relied on avoidance as a coping mechanism, remorse is often unfamiliar territory. They may struggle to name it, express it, or even sit with it comfortably. Yet it is an essential turning point, a signal that the heart that once retreated is beginning to open fully to accountability and awareness. Remorse first appears quietly, often in thoughts that linger longer than usual. They may recall moments when their words were harsh, when silence felt like abandonment, or when they prioritized their fear over your well-being. These reflections can be uncomfortable, even unsettling, because they force an avoidant to confront the emotional consequences of their behavior, something they have historically resisted. But it is precisely this discomfort that catalyzes growth. The recognition that someone they once took for granted was giving them loyalty, trust, and love creates a weight that cannot be ignored. In this recognition, remorse begins to form, not as guilt alone, but as the dawning understanding of what they lost. This stage of remorse often manifests through action as well as thought. They may attempt to communicate more thoughtfully, show up more consistently, or acknowledge mistakes they previously denied. Even small gestures, an apology, a check-in, or an effort to listen without defense reflect an internal shift from self-protection to accountability. Remorse is no longer contained internally, it seeks expression, because the avoidant begins to understand that acknowledgement is not optional, it is necessary for healing, connection, and growth. The power of this remorse lies in its humility. Avoidants who are truly reflecting cannot hide behind excuses, justifications, or deflection for long. They start to see their behavior not as a series of necessary choices, but as a pattern that limited both themselves and the people they cared about. They confront the reality that avoidance, while it may have offered temporary comfort or control, carried a hidden cost, the loss of trust, closeness, and emotional intimacy. Remorse is the heart's recognition of that cost, a profound emotional reckoning that forces them to reassess not only their past behavior but also how they wish to engage with relationships moving forward. In many ways, remorse is transformational because it forces the avoidant to develop empathy. By truly feeling the impact of their absence or withdrawal, they begin to step into your experience, not as an abstract idea, but as a lived reality. They recognize the weight of unspoken words, missed opportunities, and the emotional labor you carried while they held themselves at a distance. This empathy is not automatic. It is cultivated through self-reflection, vulnerability, and the willingness to feel discomfort. When they reach this stage, it signals that avoidance is no longer dictating their emotional responses. They are choosing consciously to confront the truth of their actions. Remorse also opens the door to transformation. It is the emotional soil in which growth begins to take root. They may begin to make different choices, approach interactions with more sensitivity, and act with a level of care they previously lacked. While remorse alone does not erase the past, it creates the conditions for meaningful change, acknowledgement, accountability, and an emerging desire to act differently in the future. Each step they take, whether tentative, awkward, or imperfect, reflects an internal shift from fear-driven avoidance to a recognition of responsibility and the possibility of redemption. Ultimately, remorse is a signal that the avoidant has moved beyond self-interest into relational awareness. It is the moment when regret transcends thought and becomes felt, understood, and expressed. And in that expression, there is the first real opportunity for healing, not just for them, but also for the relationship, should it be nurtured wisely. For someone who has experienced avoidance, witnessing remorse can serve as a validation, proof that the love, patience, and presence you offered had impact, and that even the most guarded heart is capable of awakening to accountability, empathy, and transformation. When an avoidant begins to feel remorse, the next stage in their transformation is the emergence of genuine responsibility. This is a profound shift. because avoidance is not merely a behavioral pattern. It is often a defense mechanism rooted in fear, past trauma, or insecurity. For someone who has consistently distanced themselves to protect their own emotional vulnerability, accepting responsibility requires courage, self-awareness, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. They are no longer able to rationalize their absence, deflect blame, or minimize the emotional impact of their actions. Responsibility becomes the bridge between regret and meaningful change. Taking responsibility begins internally, in the quiet chambers of reflection where they face their past behaviors without excuse. They replay interactions, consider the choices they made, and slowly recognize the ways in which avoidance shaped their responses. They begin to see patterns, times when fear dictated withdrawal, moments when pride prevented reconciliation, and instances where self-protection came at the expense of connection. This internal reckoning is not pleasant. It requires humility and the willingness to feel discomfort. Yet it is the necessary foundation for accountability, because it forces them to move from a place of self-justification to a place of truth. The next step is external. Their actions begin to reflect this newfound responsibility. Avoidants who are evolving in this way start to address the consequences of their behavior directly, rather than through vague gestures or passive acknowledgement. They may attempt to communicate more openly, offer sincere apologies, or engage in behaviors that show awareness of past harm. This is not performative. It is a conscious effort to bridge the gap they previously created. When they take responsibility, they demonstrate that their awareness is not theoretical, it is actionable. They are learning that true growth is not measured by internal reflection alone, but by the consistent choices that align with integrity and accountability. Responsibility also manifests in a willingness to confront discomfort rather than escape it. Avoidants are naturally inclined to retreat when emotions feel overwhelming, but accepting responsibility requires staying present in challenging situations. They begin to listen without defensiveness, to acknowledge the pain they caused without minimizing it, and to respond rather than react. This is transformative because it represents a radical departure from the avoidance patterns that have historically dominated their relationships. By choosing engagement over retreat, they demonstrate that they are capable of holding space for emotions that once terrified them. An important element of this responsibility is self-awareness. Avoidants learn to differentiate between fear-based reactions and intentional, conscious choices. They begin to recognize that withdrawing, ignoring, or dismissing someone's emotional needs is a decision, not an inevitability. They understand that avoidance may have been a protective strategy, but protection without accountability is ultimately destructive. By cultivating self-awareness, they start to dismantle the automatic patterns that once governed their behavior, replacing them with intentionality, thoughtfulness, and a commitment to being present in their relationships. Taking responsibility also means acknowledging the value of the other person. They begin to see you not as a safety net or a convenience, but as a person with emotional depth, worth, and a right to be treated with respect. They recognize that their avoidance caused real harm, not just missed opportunities for connection, but tangible emotional wounds. This recognition is humbling, but it is also empowering because it allows them to take ownership of their growth. They understand that while they cannot undo the past, they can shape their future through conscious effort, consistency, and integrity. Moreover, responsibility creates the possibility for transformation within the relationship. When an avoidant begins to genuinely own their behavior, it opens the door for trust to be rebuilt, for communication to improve, and for emotional intimacy to deepen. The relationship, once strained by fear and distance, can now become a space for mutual understanding and growth. Their willingness to be accountable signals that they are ready to engage in a way that is emotionally mature, intentional, and reflective of the lessons they have learned through reflection and remorse. Ultimately, the emergence of responsibility marks a turning point in the avoidance journey. It is the moment when reflection and remorse evolve into conscious action. It is the stage where they stop blaming circumstances, projecting fears, or hiding behind walls and begin to actively shape the kind of presence they wish to offer in a relationship. Responsibility is not just about acknowledging mistakes. It is about committing to be better, to show up differently, and to honor the people they care about in ways they once avoided. Through responsibility, they demonstrate that growth is possible, even for those who have long relied on avoidance as a protective mechanism. It is proof that fear can be faced, Patterns can be broken and hearts can awaken to the consequences of their actions. And in witnessing this responsibility, the person they once hurt sees the tangible impact of their own presence, the patience, the care, and the unwavering commitment that inspired growth in someone who once seemed unreachable. Responsibility transforms regret from a passive emotion into an active, living force capable of healing, reconnection, and profound personal evolution. At the final stage of an avoidance journey toward awareness and growth, the most profound realization begins to take root, the realization of the value of what was lost. This stage is not born from superficial longing or fleeting nostalgia. It is a deep internal reckoning. They start to comprehend the unique impact of your presence in their life, the irreplaceable essence of the love, care, and energy you once freely offered, and the emptiness left behind when they chose distance over connection. The weight of this awareness often hits with a quiet intensity, like a wave that cannot be ignored, and it transforms regret into a catalyst for self-reflection and potential change. This realization begins subtly. They recall your laughter, your patience, your unwavering presence, and they notice that these qualities were not mere embellishments of their life. They were central pillars that supported emotional growth, stability, and fulfillment. They begin to understand that the connection they once avoided was not an ordinary one. It was a rare alignment of trust, vulnerability, and mutual care. And in recognizing this, they also see the consequences of their avoidance, the doors they closed, the moments they missed, and the opportunities for closeness they allowed to slip away. There is a profound internal shift in this stage. No longer can they attribute distance or withdrawal solely to circumstance, fear, or misunderstanding. They begin to own their role in the disconnection, and with ownership comes clarity. They recognize that avoidance is not neutral. It is a choice that carries weight, and the absence it creates is not easily filled. They feel the magnitude of what they overlooked, not as an abstract concept, but as an emotional reality that resonates deeply within them. Every memory of your presence, every act of kindness, every gesture of patience and understanding becomes a mirror reflecting the magnitude of what they lost. This recognition often carries with it both longing and humility. Avoidance may struggle with the pain of missed opportunities, the awareness of words left unsaid, and the moments of support they failed to reciprocate. Yet this is also a moment of profound growth, because it pushes them toward emotional maturity. They begin to understand that relationships are not transactional or conditional. They require presence, consistency, and vulnerability. The realization that they failed to meet these needs for someone who invested in them deeply forces them to confront their own patterns, habits, and fears in a way that is both humbling and enlightening. As this awareness deepens, the avoidant starts to envision the what could have been. They may imagine how moments of connection, affection, and support might have shaped their lives differently if they had shown up fully. This is not meant to dwell in regret, but to illuminate the contrast between avoidance and engagement, between fear and courage, between absence and presence. In this imaginative reflection, they begin to grasp the transformative power of genuine connection, what it feels like to be seen, understood, and valued, and how their own choices prevented them from fully experiencing it. Alongside longing, there emerges a sense of responsibility for the future. While they cannot undo the past, they begin to internalize the principle that growth is always possible. They recognize that avoiding connection or failing to honor someone's presence carries real consequences, and that moving forward requires conscious effort. This awareness can lead to tangible changes in behavior, greater emotional engagement, a willingness to communicate openly, and a commitment to respond with awareness rather than fear. The recognition of lost value becomes a guide, helping them navigate relationships with newfound intention and presence. Perhaps most importantly, this stage demonstrates the power of reflection and personal evolution. They begin to see that love, trust, and connection are not to be taken for granted, and that their own patterns of avoidance have real human costs. They may never fully reclaim what was lost, but in understanding the significance of your presence, they gain a deeper understanding of themselves and the dynamics of healthy relationships. The loss becomes both a teacher and a mirror, revealing the depth of their emotional landscape and the capacity for growth they hold if they choose to engage consciously. Ultimately, when an avoidant realizes the value of what they lost, it is a transformative moment, not just for them, but as a reflection of the impact you had. Their regret becomes proof of your worth, the evidence that your patience, love, and presence left a lasting imprint that cannot be ignored. It is the moment when avoidance gives way to awareness, fear to humility, and distance to understanding. In this recognition, the avoidant is confronted with the truth that, while they may have delayed connection, the lessons of loss, reflection, and accountability now offer the possibility of deeper emotional growth, authentic engagement, and the opportunity to never take a meaningful presence for granted again. So here's the truth that I want you to carry with you. Their regret, their reflection, their late awakening, it does not define your worth. You have always been enough, always deserving of love, respect, and presence. What they failed to give you in the past is not a reflection of your value. It is a reflection of their limitations, their fears, and the journey they needed to take to even begin understanding what they lost. And here's the most powerful part. The universe does not reward chasing, it rewards becoming. Every step you take toward your own growth, your own emotional freedom, your own self-respect, transforms not only your life, but also the world around you. You have witnessed what avoidance looks like. You have experienced what it feels like to be undervalued. But now, armed with clarity, awareness, and unshakable self-worth, you stand in a space where you can choose differently. You can choose boundaries, choose growth, choose love that is reciprocated and authentic. So let this moment be your turning point. Let it be the moment where you no longer define yourself by how others treated you, but by how fiercely, how beautifully, how unconditionally you rise above it. Your presence is powerful. Your love is meaningful. Your life is worthy of deep connection, respect, and joy. And the best part, the lessons you've learned, the clarity, the insight, the strength, these are yours forever. They cannot be taken, diminished, or erased. As you walk forward, remember this: some people may regret, some may awaken, some may even return, but whether they do or not is irrelevant. What matters is that you are awake now, that you are strong, that you are aligned with your own truth. You are the keeper of your own heart. You are the architect of your own life. And no avoidance, no regret, no fear can take that from you. Thank you for allowing yourself to step into this space, to reflect deeply, and to embrace the power of your own worth. Remember, the path to emotional freedom, personal growth, and authentic connection begins with you, and you have already taken the first courageous steps. So go forward with clarity, with courage, and with the unwavering knowledge that you are enough. Thank you. Stay strong, and may your journey be filled with purpose, love, and the transformative power of your own awakening. Goodbye for now, and keep rising.